Cool. Okay. I know some of you here locally played in Decathlon 10 last year, and one of the highlights for me was the magical Calvinball. And so here we have Dan Egnor to talk about the Calvinball. Dan.
Hello. Hey, how many of the people here played that game or otherwise saw that gadget? Most, not quite all. Cool. So I won't walk carefully through everything it did. But as most of you are familiar, this is a Calvinball. It was this gadget that you received. This is a Calvinball. It was a gadget that you received during the hunt. The hunt was themed as Toon, sort of like 10 Toon, something like that. It was Decathlon Toon. And so we were brainstorming that and the idea of hey, Calvinball is kind of this fun thing that you could have an activity around. Hey, what if we actually built a Calvinball thing? And if you're not familiar with Calvin and Hobbes, the notion of Calvinball is this game where the rules are all completely made up, generally by Calvin or his split personality Hobbes. Now we're invisible. Now we have to sing a song. Now we have to count from A to Q or whatever. So you could sort of do whatever. But the idea is there'd be this gadget that would make up rules and tell you what to do. Yeah. All right. So, yes, Calvinball, inspired by Toon, originally had a way over ambitious plan. It was going to be an hour. There were going to be 10 plus stages or bases because in the comic strip you're going from base to base and each base has different rules. There was going to be duck conundrum type stuff. This was all completely ridiculous. Which brings me to my criteria for making this kind of decision. In all seriousness, something I feel very strongly is that if you're doing something with technology or gadgets in a puzzle hunt, there is actually way more downside than upside. It's really easy to have technology that kind of doesn't work in some little critical, fussy, fiddly way and just ruins the experience because now you're not playing a puzzle hunt anymore. Instead, you're kind of mentally reverse engineering I think this thing probably has a GPS in it, and it's not quite reading right where I am. Let's try moving it around a little bit or holding it up so it can get a bit, or something. Or, maybe if I power cycle this thing, then it'll work or, whatever. And at that point, you're just not this is no longer a puzzle hunt. This is bad tech support. So try to avoid that. I try to avoid that. But, of course, the enemy of, gadgets that don't suck is ambition, right? I know it would be so awesome if not only did we use the GPS position, we used the accelerometer, and we had an ultrasound sensor so that when you waved your hand in a certain pattern over the thing, it would do this thing. And then, we'll teach them a special language. Anyway. So I tried to avoid that and indeed cut scope quite a bit. In the end, there were 4 bases. One of them was basically a series of instructions of just hold this side up, hold that side up, now toss it in the air, and I'll talk about how I detected those things, if my demo here works, which it might not. Speaking of technology, always disappointing. And then there was another base that was really the only thing it had to detect was whether it was moving or not, which turned out to be hard enough. And if it was telling you sort of a true trivia answer, you were allowed to move it, and if it was telling you, or other way around, I guess, if it was telling you a lie, you could move it. And then there was one where you had to throw it in the air, and that would stop a timer, and you'd get from point to point, and so on. So all using really simple sensing technology, keeping it really basic. Whoop. There we go. So again, along the lines of keeping things simple. So for Decathlon 9, some of you will remember, I had a little tank bot thing, which was actually custom electronics, which was a whole ton of work and hassle and whatever. So I reacted and said, nope, just a cell phone. Right? Cell phones, they have accelerometers, they have GPS, they have microphones if you want that, they have audio output, they can execute logic, they can do wireless things if you want that. It's, kind of everything you'd want in a puzzle hunt gadget. Why not just use one of those? The only downside is you have to get a bunch. Turns out I happen to have a bunch lying around. Cool. They're old, right? This is a device that nobody would ever carry as a cell phone now. You can buy them on eBay for about $40. So, That's a thing, as long as you're willing to set your Android dev environment back to like API version 9. By the way, I think they're on like 30 now, so but still supports it. And so yeah, I just stuffed the phone into a playground foam ball and stuffed that playground foam ball inside a Nerf shell, and you get this. And part of the design was, hey, this is Kelvin playing with the ball outside. This should not be a piece of technology you have to treat carefully. Kelvin does not treat his objects carefully. You should be able to kick it. You should be able to throw it. You should be able to kick it down the field. I didn't entirely succeed at that, but it mostly worked. Probably should have done a little more reliability testing. There was a point in the sort of connector that failed. But in general, it's so ensconced in foam that it was relatively hard to hurt. So now we come to the true technology failure part of this presentation. Not entirely failed. So I want to talk a little bit about how you'll see it sort of stuttering, and that's because you should never give a demo that involves Wi-Fi. So when I was developing all this, so how do you figure out what it can sense and can't while still having it be in a ball so you can test what it's like to throw. And so this was my little sort of development test system that I had there. It's a little hard to see up there, I know. Sorry about that.
They can't see you. You should explain what you're doing and how that relates to them.
They should be able to see some of this.
They can't see you toss the ball.
They can't see me, yes. So as you see these, that's a good point. As you see these little waveforms wiggle, that's me, so I'll switch briefly here. So you see I do this with the ball, and then you see that on the screen. Hope that's at least slightly useful. I know that the little charts are hard to see, and also, as you can see, it's sort of stuttery, but because the Wi-Fi packets aren't all getting through. But the top one, the top chart on the upper left is accelerometers. And so among other things, what that lets you do is, if the ball is roughly at rest, the accelerometers are pretty much just picking up gravity. So in any particular orientation, there's 3 lines. The red's not coming through super bright, but there's red, there's green, there's blue. Each one is the XYZ axis accelerometer. So you can sort of see how, based on the orientation as I move it, those accelerometers change. Now, of course, if I shake it, they go nuts because there's all this acceleration going on. The second chart is the magnetometers, which is another way of getting orientation, though a much less good one, because the Earth's magnetic field is very weak and often modified by small pennies in the ground or whatever. But again, and here for the remote people, I'm sort of waving the ball around, and you can see that as I rotate it, the magnetometer readings change. And these are all sensors that are present on every single, smartphone ever invented. Though relatively few people have. The compass is, of course, incredibly crappy, as anyone who's tried to use that in maps knows. But and then the third chart was the output of my various algorithms to process that data. So the top line of that third chart, where if you can see there's sort of this broken up gray lines, that's which side it thinks is up. And so what it says is, if we think we're mostly at rest, because the accelerometers aren't going too wacky, figure out, so there's right now, you can't really see, but there's a number 2 in the gray bar, and number 2 is the side that has this little dinosaur on it. I rotate it to a different side. Well, maybe it'll come back. Anyway, at some point it'll come back. If I rotate it to a different side, it gets a different little, sort of number there, and I used that to sort of debug. There we go. So, here's one side, here's another side, and you get that little bar that sort of expands across the top there. The middle bar is the sensing of, and again, so as I was working through a bunch of sort of game scenarios, what you do with this, a lot of it is can you tell, is it at rest? Is it being moved? Is it being hit more rapidly? Is it being thrown in the air? And so there's these color codes there, which are the detectors, and as I was sort of tuning the detectors and trying a bunch of stuff. So gray is, you're not handling it, it's at rest. In the lyre ball phase, it's just sort of sitting on the ground. Yellow is sort of moderate, you are touching it, so, in lyre ball, that would, hurt you. Red is yeah, you're really shaking it. So there were a bunch of things where shake the ball to do this. And what that meant was it has to be red for, 2 seconds or whatever. And then the most tricky detector, but one I definitely wanted for a couple different scenarios, was detecting that the ball is in the air, that it's being thrown. So that's that blue color. And you see it's red for the initial throw event, and then blue for the duration of when it's in the air, and then red again as I catch it, and then yellow as I'm just sort of generally handling it, and back to gray. Detecting ordinary free flight is relatively straightforward. One thing you'll notice up top, if you look at the top accelerometer lines, and I'm about to throw this again, they all pretty much just go to 0 for the duration of the throw. And that's because it's in free fall, so there's no acceleration on it. And that's very different from any normal position where there's at least gravity acting on it. But the tricky part is throws are often not like you throwing a ball. It's like spinning or whatever. You're kicking it. It's like going all over the place. So you see that bright blue there. That's detecting of spinning rapidly. And that's done by saying, oh, the accelerometers are not changing too much. The magnetometers are kind of changing a ton. And the accelerometers are reading like well over 1G. Now, you can actually fool this. And one thing that I think no team ever picked up on is that a great way to win that phase where you have to keep it in the air all the time is just run down the field like this. And,
wouldn't have done that.
well, and what's that? And on the video. So is to run down the screen, sort of just keeping it spinning all the time. Then it would, now actually didn't pick it up there, it's red, but I sort of was able to figure out that if you really do just sort of keep whirling around, it can read that as, spinning in the air. And then you can just take your time to get down the field because it's constantly in the air. So so the point is that middle bar was kind of the output of the detector of how that worked. So then given that, the other thing that you could do with this little interface is I could build the games, and you could actually like move the little ball around, and this was the park that it happened on, and it would simulate GPS within the phone. So you could test and debug the game logic and say, oh, let me sort of in my living room pretend to play Calvinball, clickety click click, move it around. Oh, I'm supposed to turn this side up. All right, at my desk, and then now I moved into the entry zone and whatever. So, and I had little geo boxes, of course, around the various places you had to be. So that's kind of the sort of technology side of it. Let's see which one, and sort of how I would develop that. As you can see, yeah, there were various problems. First with the technology, like the whole spinning business that I was talking about. The whole even simple thing like being at rest versus moving. During the first play test, a big problem is it happened to be a really windy day out there at the park. And so they'd be playing that liar ball phase where you have to like leave the ball still, stop and drop, and leave the ball sitting still if there's a thing. But the problem is that, if it's a windy day, the ball's kind of gently, rocking around, and that turned it yellow. And so, I had to sort of retune all the thresholds. So a lot of fussiness like that. And so I'm glad I didn't try to do like any crazy like, oh, it's going to detect a gesture or a specific dance step. Like, no. And of course, software has problems. Even within the game, play testing it takes some work. Now, I was able to, again, after I sort of developed the initial algorithms when I went out there, what I did is I turned on Bluetooth on the phone. Again, nice, it's a phone, it has this stuff. Put on a pair of Bluetooth headsets, and I'm a crazy guy walking around the park over and over and over all day, and here I am wearing a set of headphones, listening very intently. Walking around with a ball over and over, and the moms are like, but better than the dude walking around with the ball that talks, which is a little, I don't know if that's weirder or less weird, but though I had some funny moments when I was walking around. This is a park in South San Francisco. It's not a Tony city or a Tony neighborhood. It's very much a family park, a bunch of local families. I really actually kind of liked it there. I would go there, drive my car there with my stuff, sort of spend half the day hacking software in my car with a little inverter, and the other half walking around testing. And it was kind of a nice way to spend a day, actually, and watching the various family reunions come and go in their little gazebos. And at one point I'm walking around, and there's this guy. He comes up, and many of us know about unconscious bias or whatever, but in this case my bias is very conscious because this guy walks up to me, he's got the pants down to yay, he's got, he just looks like not me, substantially. And he says, hey, what you up to? And I say, well, I'm just testing this thing that I made. It's for this like scavenger hunty thing. I think we all probably say scavenger hunt when we mean puzzle hunt for the muggles. And we say, hey, there's kind of this scavenger hunty thing. And he's like, oh, cool, what's it do? And I'm debugging one of my phases, so I like turn off the Bluetooth, and I'm like, as you can see, it sort of says wee when you throw it and you catch it. And, whatever. And he's like, oh, that's cool, man. So you interface with the accelerometers in there, right? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, so that's like an Android phone, yes. And we have this conversation about like using the accelerometer to detect motion, and it's a nice little bias reset a little bit, to have that conversation with someone there. And, we sort of say, yeah, if you came back on this day, you'd see a lot of people like running around with these balls. Let me go back to presentation. Yeah, various problems. The stickers came off. God, I must have littered Orange Park with like 1,000 little dinosaurs. Not 1,000, there were only 60 teams. But for a subsequent private event rerun, we discovered the magic technique that if you actually alcohol swab the surface of the ball, they stick way better. Having the tools was awesome. I think in terms of lessons learned, being able to start with what can I actually do with this technology, as opposed to like, let me dream up the 10,000 really amazing ideas and then discover that they don't work. And to be able to just iterate and just sit there for like literally a weekend, like hacking this thing. And of course, playtesting, as we all know, but continually relearn, teaches you a variety of things about your thing. And this was supposed to be, and I think this is good for technology and puzzle hunts in general, this is supposed to be easy and fun. This is supposed to be a neat, oh wow moment. This is not supposed to be super, super like, Ermagerd, I have to like thread a needle through this like logical thing, or I have to solve this impossible thing. So when in doubt, make it easy, make it accepting, make it forgiving. If I have to tune the little thing about how hard you're moving it when you're allowed to be moving, tune it on the easy side. Yeah, sure, in theory you can cheat by just like egg walking it along, but don't worry, like, yeah, you know what I mean. Honestly, this is the same as a lot of puzzle design. Like, when in doubt, just make it easier. A few examples of the terrible ideas that I did not implement. So there was this duck conundrum idea where 4-person teams, right, Shinteki. So you'd have 4 people, and it would say things like, all right, the 4 of you, one person should go, the ball would be speaking. One person go stand under the palm tree. One person go stand at the gazebo. One person stand at the water fountain. And then it would say, and the person with the ball should wait right here. And then it would say something like, okay, person with the ball, stand on one foot and throw the ball to the person at the water fountain. And then the person at the water fountain would get instructions like, now throw the ball to the person standing on one foot. And eventually you'd be all doing this crazy stuff, and it'd be telling you to throw the ball around. Kind of fun, perhaps, but you have to be able to throw the ball successfully far enough that the GPS could reliably detect that you were in fact in that location. And if you ever, duck conundrums are not even all that fun to begin with. Sorry, duck conundrum.
Addressing the elephant in the room there.
And a bunch of similar ideas. The alphabet game, where I would carefully pre-map, and I actually did this in a test park. Like, let me go carefully record every single letter that is written in this park. Like, all the little dedications on the benches and all the little signs, and GPS code every single one of them. And then play that little game that you play on the highway where it's like, let's make the alphabet out of road signs, and say, okay, but you only have like 30 seconds to do it, so you better go find, like, where am I going to find a Z? And then carry the ball to all these places. No. Anyway, so that's kind of my walkthrough. I can, tear this here. Let me switch to presenter and tear this ball apart just so you can get a sense now that I've given my little demo. So, as you saw on screen, little speaker. It's plugged into this little like who's a what's it. I think that's called an extension cord, extension cable. Lots of things ordered off of like, cheapforeignparts.com, and then just this little phone sitting in there, and then it's just like, foamy ball. So, questions? Corby.
Hey. So one of the things that I thought was neat about that game was we got to between fourth base or third base and home. There was a driveway, and everyone was really excited. And you had a thing in there that said, "Look for cars." So right. How did you do that?
GPS. So one thing I guess I could show or share with everybody is I had the way I did the GPS coding was I just made a Google My Map, I guess it's called, or one of those custom maps, and I drew the polygons around things so I could reference it to the satellite maps. So what I was able to do is just place a box, and again, being approximate's good enough, and so it's place a box there because when I was testing on my many iterations, I was like, this is kind of funny. People are going to be paying attention to this ball, and it's Thank you. And it's silly little song, I think, at that point that you were doing. And so I was like, oh, actually I was a little concerned that people wouldn't watch out. Stop it. And so, yeah, I just had a GPS box, and when you entered that box, we can turn this off now. And just triggered that event. And yeah, it's a lot of people's funny moments because it really does connect. And at their best, gadgets give you those little magical moments where it's like, hey, it knows where I am. It's sort of doing something smart. Yes, Corey.
How much computation overhead headroom did you have? Like, is there lots on the Android? And will you ever use a microcontroller for a gadget like this again?
I had tons of computational. I probably took like 0.2 of a core or something like that. Now, I wasn't doing anything. The biggest trickiness with this old phone is that the sensor data only arrives 10 times a second, even the accelerometer data. So there's just not that much data to process. The downside is you just don't get that much data. Now, a modern Nexus 2000 or whatever will typically give either 200 or 1,000 accelerometer readings a second because they want to do all this crazy flip it back and forth to turn on your camera, and they want to tune all their machine learning algorithms to do that, and there's special hardware accelerators that do those specific things, and so it gets trickier. On the other hand, they have way more CPU. The thing is, I could not easily have just used a phone for example, the little robot cars, because there was a lot of, first of all, you have to somehow drive the motors. That's not a feature of phones. You have to sense the little pegs. That's not a feature of phones. Now maybe I could have done that in some other way with capacitive bottoms on pegs or something. But certainly if you can use a phone to do your thing, use a phone to do your thing.
So you clearly wrote a bunch of tooling both to set the parameters and to get feedback as you were going through it. How much of that is something that's that other people would be able to use? Would you be? Are you able to share that? Are you interested in sharing that?
I would be happy to share that to any person who wants. Feel free to contact me. It is, I guess Rich Bragg's not here. He did a little bit of hacking on it, but it's not the most well-documented code, but it's not the least either. And if you just want an example of, here's a thing, it runs in the background, it starts automatically on start, it does GPS reading and sensor reading, and matches some stuff, yes, I'd absolutely be happy to link to that code.
One thing that comes up with electronic type puzzles, not so much with paper pencil puzzles, is that every once in a while they can get into a state where they're confused as to what sort of state the human is in. It's like, no, I'm not actually on phase 3 anymore. I've actually tried to restart this. Sort of, okay, how can I reset and start this over again? Curious how much of an issue that was with this or previous electronic puzzles, and how you dealt with it.
That is a great question. And that was probably, when I was debugging the high-level game logic, I think that was probably my main concern, was sort of what state is it in? And this goes back to that whole don't suck commandment, right? Like, don't get into some confused state where it thinks you need to be at stage 4, but you're not at stage 4, and you don't even know what stage 4 is because you missed those directions. And so what I tried to do just during my endless weekends there was to say, all right, I'm going to be the where's the I'm going to be Team Derp. Oh, the ball said to this, you know what? This would be a great time to go get a taco. Let's go get a taco. All right, what were we doing again? We got our tacos, and you weren't even beginning, and oh, it's stupid ball, shut up, I'm putting you in my bag, right? And now, all right, what are we doing again? Does it recover? One advantage of Calvinball in particular that I used a lot in that event is because it's so physically oriented, and I gave out a map with bases located. That could be the trigger for a lot of stuff. So this hardly ever came up, but if you went back to any of the bases that you hadn't been at, it would just go do that base. So, if you somehow got into stage 2, but you went back to first base, it would be like, hey, welcome to first base. Here, do this. You couldn't skip ahead because I was worried about we're going to break for tacos or go to the bathroom, and hey, now it's telling us something new because we happened to cross over one of its bases. But that sort of resetability, and I really sweated the state transitions on all of these prompts to try to make it so that, okay, if you wander off, the thing it always tells you to do is just go back to the base, and it would just repeat that every 10 seconds. Please return to base 2, please return to base 2. And you had a little map, a paper map, which usually got crumpled and stuffed into somebody's pocket around when you were doing the kick the ball down the field stage. But you had that map. It showed where base 2 was. You go back to base 2. All right, it would read those same damn directions to you again, and maybe it's a little tiring, but better than, trying to be quick or abbreviated or whatever. So that was kind of how I addressed it. They're absolutely a major, major concern for this kind of thing.
Hi. I suppose I don't know how long the event was, but how battery intensive was your app, and did any teams lose power?
It was super battery intensive. The actual Calvinball itself took 20 minutes to play, maybe, something like that. Again, my original plans were grandiose and had using it for an hour. I did a bunch of battery rundown tests because I was quite concerned about that. Another big issue is actually, believe it or not, heating. So you're using a lot of battery, and we all know phones turn into little hand warmers when they're using a lot of battery. A phone stuffed into a piece of foam inside another piece of foam
Out in the sun.
Out in the sun is a little oven. Is a little melt itself gadget. And somewhere around 80 degrees C, I found out the phone will just turn off. Fortunately, it doesn't actually destroy itself, but I actually did those tests because you could actually really get it to heat up by doing that and charging it at the same time, which fortunately is not a real thing. But yes, so I did a bunch of rundown tests, found that a phone could run for about 3 hours. I don't think we had many field battery outages. One thing that I did that I didn't mention is when you brought it back to the game control stand where we handed them out and also received them at the end, it went into a test mode. So you would finish, and it would go into a test mode, and among other things, you could shake it, which we would do when we were sort of, handing them out, and it would tell you how much battery it had, whether it had acquired GPS, and a few other basic stats, what its internal temperature was. And you could say, 60% battery, fine, here you go. Oh, this one's down to 20%. Let's set that one aside, And I had 20 of these balls. For, a total of, 30 teams each time, I think. So in reality, not that big a deal. But yeah, it's like I'm sitting here. Fortunately, screen's not on, but everything else is going full blast. Actually, radio's not on either, and that helps. But GPS is running. It's keeping the CPU and so forth.
All right, just a couple more questions.
This is a question from Curtis in Portland.
Okay.
What is the cost on the bill of materials for each ball?
I had a little spreadsheet of this. But I will make it up off the top of my head because I'm not going to go find the spreadsheet. But so the phone is the big item. So like I said, eBay, I was getting them around 50. I actually looked recently, and they're down to around 40 now, which is shocking for a phone that's 4 or 5 years old. By the way, this is my favorite phone for puzzle events because it has a good GPS for a phone of its era. So that's the key. These balls, do you remember? I want to say $15 or something.
The outer shell ones?
Yeah, the Nerf balls.
When we ordered a bunch.
Right, in quantity. And then the inner balls are free-ish.
Not quite free.
Not quite free. $3 or $4?
$4
or $5, something like that. So $40, $50, and then this is probably $20, $25 all told. These little gizmos, from cheapforeignparts.com is dealextreme, is the actual name. It was $3.99 for the little speaker gizmo and $1.99 for this. So it's adding up to.
Vinyl stickers.
Yeah, the vinyl sticker's nearly free. I have to have my significant other has a vinyl cutter at home, so that helps. So $50, everything else 20, 30. Order of magnitude, and I get to keep the phones, of course. So that's not a consumable. Whereas this is. I guess you get to keep them.
I get to keep them all.
So yeah, cost is definitely, I think, substantially cheaper than those little robots. Yeah. Hang on.
On the cost front, I'm curious if you think a Kickstarter campaign would ever be successful, if you either wanted to maybe take it up a notch, or if you think you'd have to reveal too many details in order to get the funding. So any thoughts on whether that'd be an interesting idea for us to consider for the future?
Kickstarter campaign for like puzzle hunt funding. I've seen a couple fail. I've never seen one succeed. For a puzzle hunt of this type of puzzle hunt, of sort of a community hunt. Funding arrangements for higher tech, higher production value puzzle hunts are definitely a fascinating question that I don't really have time to address. We could talk about like Mystery Madness or Midnight Madness in New York, where the entry cost was $50,000 per team. By the way, the technology, none of it worked, but it was really fancy. So there's a scale, right? And that would be its own talk, is puzzle hunt finance, aka burning holes in your pocket.
That sounds like a great topic for next year. So thank you, Dan.